I was in the car and on my way back to Chancellor within an hour of making a strong pot of coffee and pouring the entire thing into a thermos with the messenger bag full of my dad's documents. Mine, now, for the time being, occupying the passenger seat. I turned up Judas Priest's point of entry and tried to focus on the highway instead of the questions devouring me alive. 4 hours later, at just after 6 in the morning, I rolled into Chancellor, turned onto Calendar Road, and saw the phalanx of cars, the violent spiral of red, white, and blue police lights still forming a line all the way to Van's front porch. The chief of police and numerous officers stood near the last car, busying themselves, taking pictures, collecting evidence, doing their best to ignore the media and others who were quickly gathering at the scene. I kept a safe distance, a block or so away, sat in my car, drank my coffee, and tried to imagine what could have happened. "Paul?" I heard someone say after a bit, and I looked up to see Aaron, walking from where an ambulance sat parked across the road. 2 EMTs lingered in the ditch, both vaping and laughing, immune to whatever was unfolding around them. "What are you doing here?" "Aaron, hey," I said, getting out of the car and extending a hand, which he shook quickly and vigorously. I offered him my cup of coffee and he accepted, taking a hearty swallow and nodding against the humid cool of the night. "This made it all the way to Chicago. What the hell's going on?" He waved me around to the other side of my car so we were largely out of sight even from his colleagues, then waved someone else over, though I couldn't see who. "Look, I hope you've been straight with me, so I'll be straight with you," he said. "You showed up just not long after she goes missing. You're out there with Van, and we never found hide or damn hair of any second man that was out there with him at the glass factory, like you said. Then you leave town all of a sudden, and now this, with Van. Now you're back, visiting a crime scene. I'm not saying anything personally. I don't know you, but that's just it. I'm just saying, this is a fairly small area. Some people make assumptions, jump to conclusions like they make toast in the morning. We got people out looking for Margaret. The police are looking for literally anyone who might have something to say, Paul." "I'm not in cahoots with the media or something, Aaron," I replied, deliriously tired at this point and cranky. "And I didn't abduct a fucking child. Can you tell me what happened? I just drove all the way here from Chicago, for God's sake." "This who you were talking about, Aaron?" A bulky, square-jawed guy of maybe 30 strolled up, looking back and forth between the two of us. He introduced himself as Bill Manning, Chancellor's chief of police. I chuckled. "Aaron, look," I said, "I'm only poking at this thing because of my dad. I told you that." "Yeah, and I'd like to talk to you about that, Mr. Harmon," Manning said. "And," he added, "I'd like you to go ahead, get in your car, and follow me down to the station so we can have a little chat about what you're doing in Chancellor." Aaron narrowed his eyes, studying me, my reactions, trying to figure me out. I didn't know his history with Vicky, though I suspected, based on how he'd acted at the glass factory, that there was something there he wanted to protect. He was going about it the wrong way, but we all did desperate things when the people we love were in the balance. I'd been there. I guess I didn't really blame him. I agreed to follow Manning downtown, and my car crept through the neighborhood with Manning close behind in a police cruiser. I hadn't encountered Chancellor's law enforcement arm as yet, but I suppose now was as good a time as any, and I had no intention of overplaying my hand. It was probably best to make myself known, I considered, for the longer I didn't, the worse it would probably look. And I knew that by policing standards, my dad's case was essentially cold, which meant I was on my own for the most part. The time may come when I needed an assist, and being proactive was going to be my better bet. I decided, though, as I parked in front of the police station, that the last thing I would do was disclose that my family was now the proud owner of the former Parsons residence. Manning led me to a little interrogation room where I was given a weak cup of coffee and told to wait. I waited. After a while, he and another officer came in. Manning took a seat across the table from me. He struck me as the type of guy who'd probably played football in high school, had his golden moment, graduated, and had no idea what to actually do with his life. He looked like a teenager playing dress-up in his uniform. I got the distinct feeling that he was not at all used to dealing with things like abductions or children disappearing. Sitting sort of awkwardly, clearly a little nervous, fidgety. The other officer stood sentry at the door. I was punchy, and I had a hard time not laughing. I mean, what did they think? I was just going to fling myself at the door and try to escape? He asked again what I was doing there. I told Manning that I was there because I believed my dad to have spent time in Chancellor before his disappearance. We went through the basics. When he went missing, his job, and I hedged a little, telling Manning that he'd been looking for someone he knew back in the 70s. I could see him mulling it over. I suppose you can back your alibi for where you were when Miss Summers went missing, he said. I told him I could, and it was the truth. I'd done the math, and Margaret had gone missing the same week that I'd been in the studio mixing and mastering something for a commercial company. There were a dozen people who'd worked with me all day and all night for about 2 weeks right around then. I gave him the relevant phone numbers, and he told me to sit tight. They both exited the room, leaving me to my shitty coffee and ever-darkening thoughts about this whole thing. When he returned, he looked much less aggravated, but much more tired. He told me my alibis had checked out, of course they had, and again asked why I was so convinced that my dad had been in Chancellor prior to vanishing from his motel room. I repeated myself, abridging the story to nothing more than my dad looking into something strange that he thought had happened in the area, looking up someone he knew in the 70s. I asked him if he knew someone named Tanner Parsons, and he stared at me blankly. Then I asked if he knew what happened to her in 1973. I don't even know who that is. I mean, that was 50 years ago, Manning said. He sat back in his chair and gestured toward the hallway to the other officer. You want a Coke or something? This coffee's horrible. The officer returned with 2 cans of Coke, and Manning popped one, drinking deeply and sighing. I thanked him and sipped mine. I already had so much caffeine in me, I felt like I could flap my arms and fly through the ceiling. So, he said, if I'm putting 2 and 2 together here, you think that whatever is going on with your dad is somehow related to Margaret? And this Tanner person? That's about it, I replied, though admittedly I don't know how. Look, you don't owe me a damn thing. And you don't know me. I can appreciate that. I can also appreciate the frustration of trying to find something that you just can't. I have no right to ask this of you, but can I ask what happened at Van's place? Manning took a deep breath and stared at the table. I could see that he was considering what to tell me, and for a moment, I felt like I saw a flash of something in his eyes, confirmation of what I'd suspected. He was out of his depth. Not much to tell that we know of as yet. This isn't anything you won't hear on the news. Alright, we got a call from a woman who was out walking with her dog down Calendar Road, and she saw Mr. Evans out in his side yard with a shovel. He was agitated, and she thought he was saying something to her, so she started to walk through the yard toward him. But it turned out he was talking to himself, and there was a pile of kids' clothes he had almost buried. Margaret's? I asked. From what we can tell, yes, he replied. She got scared and took off with the dog, and all of a sudden she says Mr. Evans cried out and shouted, I got scared and I did what they said. I'm sorry. And fell on the ground, like on his knees, holding his head, crying, she thought. The whole thing scared the hell out of her, so she called us. We all get out there, and she was right. It was the clothes Margaret Summers was wearing when she disappeared. They were covered in blood. Jesus, I replied. You didn't find the girl? No, he replied. We're getting a search party together now. There were footprints in the mud leading away from that playhouse out behind Mr. Evans' place toward the road, but they don't keep going more than 100 feet or so that we can see. Listen, Manning, am I a suspect in this thing? I asked. Margaret? No, I don't believe you are, Manning said. Though, honestly, I wish you were. If you think your dad did have something to do with this, I'd like to know a little more about what got him here in the first damn place. I reiterated the Tanner situation, told him that I didn't suspect my dad of any wrongdoing, and generally downplayed the situation as best I could to keep from having to tell him more than I was comfortable telling, then offered to help with the Summers investigation however I could. He thanked me and said that a search party was still being formally organized, 3 different spots in town, and he'd keep me looped in, that I was otherwise free to go. I told him I'd find something to do and wait to hear something, and gave him my number, then drove to the Gold Star for some eggs and coffee. The drive to the Gold Star felt like I was driving through fog. A haze over my eyes, my brain, my soul. I glanced up in the rear view at one point, and for a minute, I didn't recognize myself. You know how if you say a word over and over again, it starts to sound foreign? The syllables just nonsense. The conversation of the patrons around me sounded like gibberish, and the ambient noise of the diner just gave me a horrible out-of-body feeling. It made me feel like I was going to throw up. A little after 8 a.m., I got a text from Manning saying there was a search party planning to cover the woods out past the Parsons house, and I told him I'd join in, thanking him. That was the patch of woods where I'd followed someone and found the strange ring of old campfires, and the thought of going back out there gave me pause, to say the least. But I decided it would seem weird to duck out now. I parked along Rudder Mill Road, thinking it best not to obviously connect myself to the house, and walked to where I saw a group of people just on the cusp of the woods, Manning and some of his officers among them. He clapped his arms behind his back, speaking like a teacher as he reminded us not to touch things if we could avoid it, to blow a whistle we'd been given if we saw anything suspicious so the police could take care of it, that sort of thing. Plastic whistle in hand, I joined in the hunt for Margaret Summers. From the woods, leaves silently crunched under the feet of almost 3 dozen people who soberly moved over the landscape without exchanging a single word. The whole thing had a surreal quality to it, the only sound just this shushing network of shoes on brush, voices calling Margaret's name like a million little Chinese lanterns floating into the air before evaporating. As I walked, I was struck, as I had been during my first foray into those woods, at how removed it felt from anything, like we were on another planet. I tried to keep the house in my line of sight, but it became difficult at times to see anything but trees, and finally, that clearing. It looked as it had the first time I'd encountered it. Just a wide, circular break in the trees with a ring of what looked like campfire remnants, but no one else gave it a second thought, as it was the most natural thing in the world. A few people went east, away from the clearing, and I thought I'd take advantage of being out there to check out something Vicky had mentioned on my first day in Chancellor. Sacred Alignment Cemetery was barely a quarter mile from the Rudder Mill house, and just a few yards from the strange campsite was a little walking path, worn down grass more than anything formal, and an old wooden sign a few paces up that just said Sacred Alignment in hand-painted letters. I wouldn't have been a bit surprised to see graves dating back to the Civil War for as aged as the whole thing looked. Just a chipped, once white picket fence, now decayed and collapsing all around the perimeter of the place, which itself was probably only the size of someone's backyard. Maybe 24 faded headstones and one large, ornate crypt at the far end presiding over it all. The name on the crypt door said Solane in carved stone, and the chain around the handles of the crypt were dark orange with rust. There was nothing to indicate that anyone had been there for decades, honestly, so I made my way back through the trees and fell back in with the group of searchers from before. At that point, we'd been out there for probably 3 hours, and the sun was rising higher in the sky, anticipating midday. A few others arrived, presumably to take over from those who needed a break, and I'd gone straight from driving 4 hours on no sleep to being interrogated to traipsing through the woods. I was exhausted beyond measure. So I tagged out with a young school teacher from nearby Cameron, Illinois, who wavered near tears as she hugged me tight and said to keep praying. I made my way back through the woods and toward the Parsons house, finally emerging through the tree line and facing the expanse of land that separated the woods from the former Parsons property. I went inside, made a pot of coffee, and sat down to try and organize my thoughts on the whole mess. It only made sense that whatever had happened to my dad and whatever happened to Margaret Summers could be related. Maybe even indirectly, but related somehow. And perhaps that was related, again, in some direct or indirect way, to what had happened to Tanner. Because of it. Maybe. If what Hugh had said about Tanner was true, that she had that strange symbol cut into her skin, then someone had done that to her for reasons unknown. And maybe that someone was angry that she got away from them. Had they been there watching the night my dad and Hugh encountered Tanner? Were they still here? Was it reasonable, then, to consider that whomever was responsible for what happened to Tanner in 1973 had reasons to hold on to that for some reason? Had the same person or the same people who'd done what they did to Tanner taken my dad? Taken Margaret? Was it this John character? If not all that, in some capacity, what about Tanner Parsons made her situation so compelling to my dad? Beyond his encounter with her that night, what made her important? Maybe nothing. Of course, maybe it was just my dad fixating on something that had left him wallowing in guilt for years on end. But maybe it wasn't. The buried figurine that had belonged to Tanner, the missing flyer, hell, the very idea that my dad had camped at that burned out house just to try to... There was more to it. Had to be. More that somehow tied Tanner and Rich and Margaret together. Not to mention the others who had gone missing for so long. That's what I had to determine, and I had to do it without the police. I couldn't say I was terribly surprised at Aaron's suggestion that I could be a potential suspect for Margaret's disappearance, though it was a gross feeling to acknowledge, but objectively I couldn't be too angry about it. It made sense. And I knew that if I gave them everything now, everything my father had discovered, everything that was in the basement, it would probably seem far too convenient, and I'd likely be shut out. I had to know now for myself what was happening. I was too far down the path to stop. I was a little surprised that for as many unknown faces as I saw hunting for Margaret, I hadn't heard from or seen Vicky. I called her and it went to voicemail, so I texted her. Back in town, complicated, call back ASAP. I finished part of a cup of coffee, then sank into the couch, and I was asleep so fast that when I woke up a couple of hours later, I didn't even immediately realize I dozed off, like twilight sleep or something. I got up and tried to call Vicky again, voicemail, and scrolled through the numerous updates on Margaret Summers that had appeared in every corner of the news media. Apparently, as I'd slept, CNN had arrived, along with MSNBC, Fox News, and a litany of local reporters from Chicago to St. Louis. According to Manning and a recorded clip shared by the networks, search parties would continue looking for the missing girl, and the community would appreciate the nation's prayers. I took a shower and changed clothes, and while I wasn't really hungry, I knew I needed to stay going, so I hit a gas station just inside town and bought a large coffee and some Hostess donuts. The late lunch of champions. I turned on the radio and explored both the FM and AM bands for any signs of life, landing only on a couple of country stations and the college station at Western Illinois University that was cranking out some sort of noisy, psychedelic thing. I drove slowly through downtown, then began cruising the neighborhoods, down solemn streets, past quiet houses and dark storefronts, wondering what the missing pieces could be, and where that girl was. I knew that the answer was probably going to be less than comforting. I eventually gave up my valiant but fruitless canvass and gave in to my feelings of hopelessness for a little bit, which sometimes you had to do in order to reframe a situation. At least that's what I told myself as I did a quick Google search for an address. Soon after, I found myself parked on the road across from the entrance to Sutter Place. Rickety-looking archway that was so sun-faded you could barely make out the letters. The Summers residence was a few trailers in on the left side. I'd scouted it already on Google Maps, though part of me was understandably reticent to actually pull the trigger and drive in. I finished my coffee, then eased the car down the drive flanked by mobile homes, stopping when I reached their number. There was a car in the driveway and lights on inside, so I parked, got out, and hesitated for a minute before approaching the door. I could hear what I thought was someone on the phone through the thin walls, but I figured it would look weirder if I just lingered outside, so I rapped on the metal door and waited. There was a taut moment of silence, and the door clicked open. A woman in her early 30s stood before me wearing a pair of cut-off denim shorts and a t-shirt advertising a country bar in Mattoon, Illinois. Her long, dyed blonde hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and the bags under her eyes suggested she hadn't had a night's sleep in a very long time. She held a cell phone in her hand and stared at me dumbly. "Yeah?" she said. "Who are you?" "My name is Paul Harmon," I replied. "I was hoping to talk to you about your daughter." I couldn't immediately tell if it was hope or anger I saw in her expression. "I gotta go," she said into the phone, setting it down inside and folding her arms as she regarded me. "I know this is a terrible time," I said, "and I don't know where she is. But I wondered if I could ask you a few things about what's happened. Mister, I don't know what on earth you think..." She started off strong, then paused, trailed off, furrowed her brow. "I'll come out there," she said finally, reaching for something and closing the door behind her. It was a mace keychain, which she held firmly in her hand right in front of her. "I'll use this, you understand me?" "Of course, yeah, absolutely," I said. I don't want to bother you. I'm sorry for even being here, believe me." "Then why are you?" she said quickly. "And Margie isn't my kid, she's my niece." "Paul Harmon," I repeated, extending a hand. She stared down at my palm, then finally shook it and shook her head immediately as though she regretted it. "Bethany Myers, Beth." "Hi, Beth," I said. Do you know a man named Richard Harmon?" "I don't think so," she said. "Why?" I tried to find something reasonable to offer in terms of response. I didn't want to throw any of my dad's weird Margaret ephemera right on the table, so instead I opened up the photos on my phone and found the picture I'd shown Van. "This man?" "Yeah," she said without hesitation. "I've seen him. Didn't know his name, but I've seen him." "Where?" I said. "I mean, recently?" "Not that recently," she said. "I seen him around the Point House a few months ago. He was around a lot and then he wasn't. I know because I saw him talking to Chet, and I bartend there one night a week, and I figured if he was talking to Chet, he was another drunk I'd have to wrangle out of there at the end of the night, so I had my eye on him." "Who's Chet?" I replied. "Chester Vaughn," she said. "He used to DJ for the local radio station here in town. He thinks he's a, I don't know, town historian, sort of, but he's got the wet brain, if you ask me. He spends all his time at the Point House." She nodded at my phone. "Who is he?" "My dad," I said, "and I think whatever happened to Margaret might have happened to him too. And maybe other people." "What happened to him?" she said, suspicion creeping back into her voice, along with something else that softened her hard expression. I don't know," I said. "He's just gone." She relaxed her grip on the mace as well as her rigid posture and sighed deeply, staring past me into the distance. "I'm sorry, Paul," she said finally. I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I don't know if you know what's happened today here. I do. And I'm sorry too," I said. "I was out with the groups this morning in the woods, helping look for her, and I know about what's happening with the clothes." A car crept down the drive near where we stood at the edge of the mobile home, and Beth eyeballed it carefully. "Christ," she muttered. "Come on, let's go inside. That guy is Peoria News. They've been creeping us for weeks." I followed her inside. The trailer was modestly but nicely decorated, some fresh cut flowers in a vase on the 4-person dining table, fridge covered in drawings, held in place by magnets, presumably Margaret's. Beyond, the family room was typical. Big TV with an Xbox on the floor in front of it, sectional couch, some family photos on the walls. It was any house in America. "Not bad," I said, pointing at the drawings. "Yeah," Beth said, almost smiling. "She wants to work in the movies, animation and stuff. I tease her she ain't that good yet, but she's getting there." I could see her approaching tears. I don't know why I said stuff like that, just kidding with her. She knows I was kidding, I know she does. "I have no doubt she does," I replied, studying the drawings. A dog, golden retriever, in exquisite detail with a collar dongle that read Lucy in calligraphy. Various little sketches of faces, a flower bed, small studies of everyday objects. "Are they all hers?" I asked. "Yeah," Beth said. She saw the one I'd fixated on and she chuckled. I think she was joking around with that one. She said she drew it in her sleep. The drawing in question, by contrast with the others, looked like it had been drawn by a small child. with clumsy, uneven lines portraying a girl in an athletic jersey, surrounded by hastily drawn animals and a series of low fires burning in what looked like a broad circle on the ground around her. Her jersey read Summers, 36. She play sports? No, Beth said. No, I don't know what that's all about. Listen, I have to get to work soon. I was just holding down the fort until Monica and Tony got home. They're with the police talking about everything at the... She paused. At the Evans house. Paul, I have to ask you, why do you think this has anything to do with your dad? I mean, what made you actually come here? It's too coincidental, I replied. From what I understand, people go missing around here a lot more than they should. Beth sighed deeply and gazed out the window. I couldn't tell if she was actively avoiding eye contact or just in some sort of regretful thought. You can sure as hell say that, she finally muttered. Would Margaret have met him for some reason? I asked. I don't mean that in a weird way. I just mean when you saw him, was it just... It was only at the bar? Nowhere. She might have come into contact with him? Not that I know of, but I don't even live in Chancellor, Beth replied. I'm in Monmouth, so I'm only here to visit usually. Are you like working with the police or... No, nothing like that, I said. I'm just a guy. And I know my dad spent some time here. I only heard about the thing with Margaret last week. I only came to Chancellor for the first time last week. I just thought maybe, it's a small enough town and everything, and A radio suddenly exploded into life on the kitchen counter. 38 Special pumping out the small speakers, and we both jumped about a foot. Jesus, Beth hissed. Sorry about that. Tony normally works second shift. That must be one of his alarms. She reached over to turn it down, accidentally bumping the AM/FM switch before finding the volume. The band clicked over, music replaced with a messy static. Wait, stop, I said, a little louder than I should have, and Beth stepped back as though reassessing my threat level, frowning at me angrily. I'm sorry, go back. What? She said, turning the music back up. No, the dial, I said. She clicked the switch and I drew in a deep breath. The familiar loops filtered into the kitchen over a bed of static. The same pattern I'd recorded at Van's house. What the hell is that? Beth said. I don't know, I replied, but I've heard it before. When? She said. I ignored that question, noticing for the first time that the little boombox had stickers all over it. My Hero Academia and other anime characters. Is this Margaret's radio? Yeah, Beth replied. Why? Did they change the stations? I asked. I doubt it, Beth said. They haven't done anything with any of her stuff. Tony's been sleeping on the couch, so if Margaret comes home, she'll see him as soon as she comes in the door. He probably just brought the radio out here like it was, left the dial where it was. She studied me. What is this, Paul? Who is that? The girl talking. What's she saying? I had no answer. After a moment, she joined me in just staring at the radio. The bizarre signal and girl's droning voice, the only thing that existed, momentarily, in the somber space of Margaret Summers' kitchen. I sat in the kitchen of the Rudder Mill house as the afternoon wound toward evening, the light slowly capitulating to darkness. In the distance, I could see the faint dots of flashlights in the woods. With Beth's permission, I had taken a photo of Margaret's drawings. I don't know why. I think in some weird way it helped ground everything in reality, the reality of a missing girl, today, here, now. I looked at them, imagined her sitting at the dining table where I'd been a couple hours before and sketching, living her quiet, normal life. While I'd been chatting with Margaret's aunt, I'd received 2 voicemails from a Dr. Gordon's office regarding an overdue bill of my dad's for whom I was listed as an emergency contact. Dr. Gordon. Why'd the name ring a bell? I dialed the number, explained who I was, and it was then that I remembered who I was talking to. It was the hypnotherapist whose number my dad had jotted down in his notebook and had visited in Peoria. Though the last time I talked to them, they wouldn't tell me anything. They apologized, indicating that my dad hadn't paid for the 2 sessions he'd had a few months back. I apologized in turn and told them not to hold their breath. The receptionist to whom I was speaking said she was sorry, then asked me to hold. I agreed and sat there in silence for maybe 30 seconds before she returned. Said that given the circumstances, they'd waive the charges. I thanked her, and she started to hang up before I stopped her. Hey, I said, last time I called, you said you couldn't do anything for me, but I'm going to be honest with you, I need all the information I can get here. She asked me to hold again, then returned after just a few seconds. Well, we don't have any non-disclosures on file for your father, she said. Whoever told you they couldn't talk to you last time didn't know what they were talking about. I saw flashlights growing more defined as evening set in through the window, and I lowered the shades on the kitchen windows. I thanked her and asked if she could tell me what my father had discussed with him when he was there. She said she'd have Dr. Gordon call me back shortly when he was done with his last session for the day, and I thanked her. He called back about 15 minutes later, and I thanked him for calling, gave him the Cliff's Notes of the situation, said that I'd like to get a record of the sessions with my dad, all of that, and Gordon made a puzzled grunt in response. Missing, he said. On his trip? What do you mean, I said. What trip? He mentioned that my dad had said during their second and last session that he might be taking a trip soon, and that he'd be in touch if he returned. I apologize for any confusion, he noted. Our accounts department was just following up because he'd forgotten to sell the last invoice. I mean, probably just an oversight. Regardless, I'm sorry to hear what's happened, and I hope things come out okay. In reviewing these notes, he said, well, your dad thought he was losing time. Losing time? I replied. What does that mean? We see it a lot in older patients, he said. We get quite a few late middle-aged people in here hoping to deal with memory loss. My dad didn't have memory loss, I replied, though I wasn't even sure why I was getting defensive. Had he been losing his memory and he just hadn't told me? It would certainly account for his wanting to clear up the events of the past that were weighing on him in short order. Well, according to him, he did, Gordon said. He was having periods of time in which he couldn't remember what he'd been doing, where he'd been, that kind of a thing. It says here, this is what he wrote on his intake sheet. Blank periods in memory, lost time, no memory of having done certain things or spent time in certain places. He said he'd email me a PDF of the notes, and a few minutes after we hung up, I was reviewing them, admittedly without any real expectation of discovery. My dad had known a guy at his company who quit smoking from hypnotism, and since then he'd always been curious about it. I didn't see it as anything more than the power of suggestion, but I knew it'd be foolish to ignore information about my dad now in any capacity. The first appointment appeared to have been an introductory session, fact-finding, so to speak, to determine why my dad was there. According to the summary, my dad had been suffering from insomnia, night terrors, hallucinations, you name it, and the scary disruptions to your psyche department. I had no idea. We hadn't talked much for quite a while before he went missing, and I felt a deep pang of guilt thinking about him suffering through all of that alone. It then went on to say that he experienced moments of lost time, finding himself in places without knowing exactly how he'd gotten there. The doctor's handwriting was a bit of a mess. The session notes I'd received were exactly that, scans of his notes, but I could make out 3 phrases: glassworks, bridge, and house fire. And I could see my dad's name in there, along with Tanner, Chet, and John being discussed. Following that was a description of the doctor's process, the procedure by which my dad was hypnotized, I suppose, and then a series of questions followed by my dad's responses. Where are you now? Office. Think about the last place you were when you lost time. What do you see? The bridge. What's around the bridge? Road. Have you been to the bridge before? Yes. Didn't know it was the bridge, though. Can you clarify what you mean by that? No response. There were 5 or 6 questions and answers I simply couldn't decipher, followed by more calls and responses. What did Chet say to you when you told him that? He said for me to be safe, that not everyone would want me talking about it. About what happened to Tanner, you mean? Yes. What did John show you that made you so upset, Richard? Lots of things. Kids. The fire. My son. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. The questions continued. What fire? The church, the house, others, lots of fires, empty places. Did you recognize any of the kids? Just a few from pictures. Who did you recognize from pictures? Gloria Nesbitt, Sarah Noel, Nicole Astor, Clement. And did you see Tanner? No, she isn't there. There's another girl. What other girl? A new girl. With the mark. What mark? 18. 18 and 18. 18 and 18. 18 and 18. Let's keep going, Richard. What else do you see? Who else do you see? Not who. Okay, what else do you see then? Other things. Wrong things. Things from the empty places. Are you certain that Tanner is alive, Richard? Yes. And why do you think that? Because John told me. What did John say about Tanner specifically? He said the child survived. There was a note then from the doctor, added later in a different color of ink, that read as follows. Quote, agitated, began to cry, answered the next 11 questions with the phrase, I broke the circle. No further responses. Ended session. There were only a handful of old-timers in the Point House tap. The lifer drunks, the unemployed, the retired. I took a seat at the end so I could see the room. Chancellor reminded me of Galesburg in a lot of ways, albeit smaller, obviously, but there was a shared sense of experience in the faces that exchanged nods as they passed in and out of the place. A connectedness that didn't always exist once a town got past a certain size. I knew now that my dad believed Tanner to be alive, and that this John person had told him as much. I texted Vicky that I needed to talk to her as soon as possible and checked my watch. It was just after 5 in the evening. Not too early for a beer, I hoped, if you were a retired radio DJ with a drinking problem. I sipped my drink and looked out the window. You could see the highway, and I could almost see the Parsons house from where I sat. Somewhere in the distance, a siren swelled and faded. An older man approached the bar near where I sat, smiling and nodding at me as he flagged down the bartender. If I had to guess, I'd have said he was in his early to mid-70s, skinny, wispy white beard, looked like he'd be right at home playing guitar for the Allman Brothers. The bartender noticed him, calling from the other end of the bar. Ready to settle up, Chet? I waved at the bartender and pointed at my check, indicating that I'd pay both, and he nodded. Are you Chester Vaughn? I said. Do I owe you a drink? He said with a bleary-eyed smile. No, I chuckled. My name's Paul Harmon. Someone I know says you were sort of the town historian. 72 years, like it or not, so yeah, I guess I'm one of them at least, he said. The bartender took my money for the drinks and I waved off the change. Now I do owe you a drink, Chet replied. Thanks, friend. I don't... What do you want? What are you looking to find out? Dan Hawkins, he said. Paul Harmon, I repeated. Oh, Chet grunted with a tired smile, studying me. Are you any relation to a Richard? I am, I said, unable to keep the urgency from my voice, and I know that you talked to my dad about Tanner. Among other things, he said. Sat in that very stool and had that same look on his face you have right now. What look is that? I said, a little defensive. Chet sighed deeply and squinted at me. Desperate-like, trying to figure something out. I could see his drunken gears turning. What time is it? Not quite 5:30, I said. Well, if you have a car, Paul Harmon, I'd appreciate a ride home, he said. He looked at the cheap digital watch on his wrist. We have enough time for me to tell you the whole story before he arrives. Who? I replied. Who else? Chet said. Your friend and mine, the guy your dad was so desperate to find. The bad penny in our fair little town. Mr. John Bellringer.
You have been listening to Cicatrix, Episode 6, A Broken Circle. Cicatrix is a production of Sensory Eclipse Media with funding from the estate of Vincent Galt and has been transcribed and produced by Christopher Bevard. For more information on this and other podcasts from Sensory Eclipse, as well as more information regarding the ongoing mystery of Richard Harmon's disappearance, please visit www.sensoryeclipse.com. Original music and score by the Crone Hex. Check them out at thecronehex.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening.